last night or yesterday afternoon, after I got off the air and went home and had lunch, Louise and I said, hey, you know, there's a lot of conversation about Wag the Dog, and we haven't seen that movie since 1997. Let's pull it up. And so we went over to Amazon and bought a copy and watched it on, digitally, and watched it on our TV last night, and it just blew my mind. I thought, I want to get Larry Beinhart back on, the guy who wrote the book that they made the movie out of, Wag the Dog. And so we did. Here he is, Larry Beinhart. It's been a while since we've talked, my friend. Thank you so much for dropping by.
Hi, Tom. It's great to talk to you again.
Thank you. As you know, first of all, with the original Wag the Dog, and one of the things that I had somehow missed over the years, I always, I always assumed that Reagan went after Grenada because of the little mini recession that he had. He was rather unpopular. But you point out in the movie, or the movie points out, that it was just, that invasion of Grenada was just 2 days after, what was it, 83, I think, just 2 days after, in October of 83, in fact, 2 days after the massive death of U.S. Marines in the barracks in Lebanon, which would, 2 days later, would suggest that invasion plan had been on the books for a while. Do you really think that was put on the books by Reagan when he came into office as a plan B if things ever went south, which they did when the Marines got murdered?
I don't know if there was that much planning in it. It has a spur-of-the-moment feel to it. It looks like after pulling out of Beirut, they wanted to do something that made America look like it was still militarily active.
Right.
And it was really smart to pull out of Beirut, as military involvement in the Middle East since then has clearly demonstrated.
Yeah, I'll say. So if you want to just recap for us, Larry, real quickly, the whole Wag the Dog premise. Okay.
Well, there are two completely different premises. One is the book, one is the movie. In the book is about Gulf War I. The premise of Gulf War I is both a satire on conspiracy theories and a very elaborate conspiracy theory. And it's that Gulf War I was a made-for-TV movie, and my favorite proof of that is that they pre-sold the foreign rights, which is true, by the way.
What do you mean by that?
Well, George H.W. Bush was very clever. Before he started that war, he got Japan and the Saudis and some other foreign groups to fund it, which is how you make a movie. You sell the foreign rights before you make the movie.
Amazing.
And it was clearly, at least as what was clearly understood, was that modern day war in a democracy has got to be a performance for a domestic audience. It's got to be something that will make the people at home entertained and happy. Whether it's genuinely justified or not, that really doesn't matter. What matters is how it plays on TV. And Gulf War I was brilliantly constructed. They got Saddam Hussein to play Hitler. They got, they actually screen tested generals before they were allowed to talk to the media.
Wow.
And so, it was beautifully cast. It was beautifully orchestrated. In retrospect, it was an extremely well-run, successful war, and George H.W. Bush did not make the incredible mistake of trying to conquer and occupy Iraq.
Right. It lasted only 100 days, this war.
They set a legal goal. It really was a legal goal to drive an invader out of the invaded country, Kuwait. They got that. They stopped. It was over.
Right.
So, by the time it was time to make this into a movie, he was no longer president. Clinton was president. Clinton hadn't invaded anybody, but he did have a bimbo problem, which, by the way, George H.W. Bush had also. It never quite erupted as severely, but it was there, and it's mentioned in the book.
And he's got a new one now. He's the first President Bush has been accused on numerous occasions of grabbing women's butts.
Yeah, well, you know, hey, old men in wheelchairs think they have, you know, a hall pass for that.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure that's a universal statement, but I get it.
It has its comic possibilities.
Yeah.
And George H.W. Bush, incidentally, even back when he was president, was well known privately. Because we didn't publicize that stuff, he was well known privately for loving dirty jokes.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, you know, not a horrible characteristic. I won't quote any on the air now because it's too dangerous.
Thank you. But Bill Clinton had a bimbo problem, and so the movie decided to
by the time they were
recalibrate this.
making the movie, Clinton was president. Clinton didn't have a real war, so they took the kind of the essence of this, of using a war for domestic purposes to distract from electoral problems,
right.
which was also the essence of the book. Was Gulf War I took place when George H.W. Bush was having a terrible time in the polls. They had all sorts of problems. And it worked, but his timing was bad because by the time it got to election time, the war had been over for a year and a half. Americans were bored, and they'd moved on to the next thing.
Right.
Okay, so the question is this a Wag the Dog moment?
Right.
And to a certain degree, I mean, if there's an actual military event, to a certain degree, the answer has to be yes. But it's I guess a qualified yes. That is to say, I don't really think, though some people do, that this is a manufactured incident, that we're pretending that Assad is using chemical weapons, that somebody else is doing it, or the evidence is manufactured, or they're using old footage from previous chemical attacks in order to have an incident. Now, Assad does horrible, terrible things.
Right. Does
them routinely. He tortures people. He disappears people. He assassinates people. The war in Syria is probably the great humanitarian crisis of our time. Mm. And nobody has figured out how to deal with the humanitarian part of it. It is the difficulty that Obama ran into. They could not figure out what to do short of a full-scale invasion. And we already had 2 full-scale invasions. And they were failures. Iraq and Afghanistan. We're still in both. Nobody even discussed what the dimensions of a full-scale invasion and a full-scale occupation would be. You know, I mean, the numbers are available. I mean, you know, it's interesting. Petraeus rewrote the manual describing occupations, but if you go to it, and it's available online, it's a U.S. military publication. You know, for an occupation of Iraq, the minimum numbers based on their population was something like 650,000, if I remember correctly. Mm-hmm. I mean, that would have been the size of the commitment in order to do it. Now, Petraeus, this is not in. I've never found this published in print anywhere, but apparently what he did was he calculated Iraqi troops plus U.S. troops as the occupying force. And clearly, once he had taken over after the country had collapsed, and clearly that was a calculation that didn't work because the Iraqi troops were not prepared to occupy their own country.
Right. Well, Larry, we're going to hit a break here in about a minute and a half.
Fine.
So, do you believe? I mean, you know, you've really observed this, and I have so much respect for you as a political observer. I remember back when you wrote the piece about how anytime the income tax is above 50%, that the economy stabilizes. I thought that was absolutely brilliant.
Thank you.
Do you really think that Grenada and maybe Iraq 1 and Iraq 2, George W. Bush's war, or Afghanistan anyway, were actually designed more as distractions than as actual attempts to affect policy?
You know, okay, designed. Okay, Iraq, the invasion of Kuwait was allowed to happen probably through carelessness or inattention. And Saddam Hussein literally asked the U.S. government, do you mind?
Right, through April Gillespie, yeah.
Right. And April said, nah, that's fine, go ahead. And then after it happened, I think a couple of things happened. One is there was a kind of a shock in Washington. Hey, it actually happened, and should this be embarrassing? And then Margaret Thatcher, who had resurrected her political career through the war in the Falklands,
right,
talked to George H.W. Bush and, quote, the quote is, stiffened his spine. Now, whether she told him, hey, this is a way to become the most popular president in the last
just have a little war, right?
Huh?
Just have a little war.
Yeah. So he went ahead. And again, you know, in retrospect, even though, hey, the entire book is mocking it, making fun of it, making a satire of it, in retrospect, you know, he was the sanest war president we have had, at least since Truman, or since Eisenhower.
Yeah, because Truman blew up in the Korean War.
It was a well-run, successful war with minimal casualties, actually on both sides, and you know, and it was legal.
Yeah, Larry, we're hitting a hard break here. We gotta bail out. But Larry Beinhart, the author of numerous books, including Wag the Dog. The book has aged well. The movie has aged well. Absolutely brilliant stuff. Larry, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Great talking with you. We'll be right back.